Yeah,
Alicia, great to have you here. Were you here yesterday?
I was, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, how's the cadence? Are we going at the right speed for you? What can we do different for you today?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. Like one of the other speakers said, I'm new to this as well. So for me, it was more taking notes on what is possible, knowing that I'm not tomorrow going to go out and do it myself. But again, it's good to see what is available and what we could do as we move over some of our forms. So no, I thought both the ladies did a great job yesterday, and I'm looking forward to learning some more the rest of the week.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you know that Joanne and Kirby are actually not only do they both work here, but they're sisters. If you could tell from their picture that Joanne started working at Qdabra 12 years ago, and she recruited her sister Kirby, who's been an incredible asset to the team here over the last 2 years. Kirby's our support lead now. I don't know if you could tell from their pictures, but they actually are sisters. so, um, so that's why they're able to work so well together. I'm just kidding. But Donald, any feedback for us from yesterday? Anything you want us to do different?
No, the cadence is always with training going to be a little quick. That didn't bother me. What was good though was when the speakers would say, "Well, this is what I'm going to do. I have to come here because I need to attach this. I need to set
Mm-hmm.
this rule. I need to do something," and then you can see them doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I would. I mean that's helpful for me because I'm in my brain going, oh, okay, I know they have to make this connection. Now, would I be able to do that on my own without looking at the video? Probably not. Which is the next point. I know that they sent a link, but um, I may not be able to get to it for a couple weeks. So um, I take it this is all going to be on YouTube so that we would be able to look at it more than just a couple weeks out.
Yes. Yes, of
Okay,
course.
because
Yeah.
I'll need that. At least I have notes saying, hey, on day one we did this. Try to go into your form and duplicate the same thing and see what happens.
Right. That's great to have you here. Yeah. So thanks for that. I totally agree. I think Joanne and Curry did an excellent job of articulating what they were doing while they were doing it, and then also reviewing what they showed you after they did it. It's a great presentation skills that you two have. Let's see. I think a couple more people just want to do a quick shout out here. Emma, good morning.
Good morning, Patrick.
We meet finally.
Yeah, yep. I had an excellent time yesterday. I really enjoy sitting down with new software and seeing how it works and kind of viewing the hands-on, this is what a user would do kind of way of approaching it. I think that the pace is great. I have absolutely no experience with Infopath, let alone FormsViewer, and I was really able to follow along kind of easily and figure out what was going on the back end, but I don't know if that's because I have a lot of experience as a developer, so FormsViewer just makes sense to me as a program. So I'm perfectly fine with the pace though, and it's
That's
a
wonderful.
really interesting product, and I thought that, yeah, like what was said before, the ladies did a really, really great job going through each of the labs. I followed along in the PDF. I'm not going to be able to complete them immediately, but I like that I can kind of watch it live and know what to expect. I think it's a really, really great way of introducing it.
And there's a lot of topics that we don't necessarily cover in the training. One of those topics is extending the form with JavaScript. And we've done many, many webinars on this. So for you especially, and for your team, I mean, if you're helping non-developers, then the labs are perfect, right? Because they're not going to go into the weeds of how
Yes,
to extend the forms to do crazy things that you never knew you could do.
right. I think it's great that it's not, I would say that it's not very intimidating. You know, you can come in and you can say, I'd like you to try and build a form, and the interface is really user friendly. And it's not like some products where you're kind of expecting people to come in with some background knowledge on forms themselves. So I really, really like that about it.
I think that's one of the reasons why, and I'll talk more about this in a second, but it's one of the reasons why Infopath continues to be a solution for a lot of organizations out there, is because the Power Apps is not as user-friendly when it comes to creating forms. Now keep in mind though that there is this extensions framework. So today we're going to show the CSS extensions, which will show you a little bit of a preview of what you could do with JavaScript to extend your forms. One of the other, we do a lot of custom controls with FormsViewer using JavaScript. So there are those avenues of extension, or whatever you want to call it, out there. Just keep that in the back of your mind, that there's a lot of stuff you can do with JavaScript. In fact, another technique they're going to show today, not just the responsive UI design, which is CSS, and there's a little bit of JavaScript in there, I guess. Not really. But there is another technique they're going to show, which is this automatic logout, which is, after 5 minutes or 30 minutes, then log the user out. That's something that you can add to all your forms, and we've actually created the example for you. And there's a little bit of code in there that does that timeout. And so you'll see how we extend the forms with that sample today. I think that's lab 4 today. Is that right, Kirby? Is the auto logout the last lab today?
Yep, that's right.
Cool. Thanks, Emma. It's great to have you here. Last but not least, Shane. Shane, how are you doing today?
Great. Good morning.
Good morning. We have the campfire theme today, just as we're trying to sort of make everyone feel like COVID is just a dream, right? Yesterday we were on the beach, and today you're with your family camping in a very safe location with no bears.
Nice. Like it.
Any feedback for us before we get going?
I wasn't able to make it yesterday, so
right.
I can't give any feedback other than I'm excited to be here, and I'll be on all the classes moving forward. Yesterday wasn't a good day, but looking forward, and I'm trying to get set up for what I missed yesterday by adding the list templates in and all of that stuff now, so that I can pick up right where hopefully everybody left off.
You can see that there's no fire starter issues today. The fire is warm, waiting for you to join us.
Well, thank you.
So just before we get started, let's take a look at what we're going to do today. Joanna, if you're sharing, so could you just show the slide for our topics today? I know you got the quiz. We're going to do that. Actually, we should have done that a second ago. I'm sorry. What am I doing? I'm just completely disrupting you today. So let me ask one question to myself, and that is the question that Kathy, who's not here, asked us yesterday, which is, can you compare and contrast Power Apps with FormsViewer? Now, Power Apps is Microsoft's technology for building new applications on SharePoint online, SharePoint, 0365, Office Online. Microsoft has these Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI technologies. Power Automate used to be called Flow. So they basically have replaced Infopath with Power Apps. They've replaced SharePoint Designer with what they're calling Power Automate, which is Flow. And they have this new tool called Power BI, which you can use to do reporting. So that's kind of the three-legged stool that all of their applications sit on. Are those, the ability to create an app, the ability to create workflow with other line of business applications, and then the ability to report on it. So those three technologies are really critical moving forward for Microsoft in the cloud. They don't necessarily all apply for people who are on-prem. If you have an on-prem instance with a hybrid cloud, so you have a gateway to Office Online, then you can use all three of those. Otherwise, if you don't have a gateway, you can still use Power BI, but you can't use the other two. And it's unclear when they're going to launch those technologies for on-prem users, if at all. Specifically Power Automate and Power Apps. And the reason for that is that both of those are provider-hosted apps, which require quite a bit of installation. And to some of you, Donald, you're familiar with how much work it takes to install FormsViewer on-prem. But so we do have on-prem installations of FormsViewer, and we can install FormsViewer, which is also a provider-hosted application, just like Power Apps or Power Automate. They're both using the same architecture in terms of how we implemented the service, and it can be installed on-prem. It's just a little more work, and that may be one of the reasons why Microsoft is not providing that option. The other reason may be because of the licensing. So FormsViewer, unlike Power Apps and Power Automate, is not based on user licensing. We base it on usage, or if you're on-prem, on the entire SharePoint site. So there's those differences as well. But just to, I think to answer Kathy's question from yesterday about when do you use Power Apps, when do you use FormsViewer, the obvious time to use FormsViewer is for your existing Infopath forms, because it's the lowest cost way to move them forward, either to the cloud or on-prem, to keep them going without using Infopath. And I think the second reason is if you have a document-centric process, so you have like a new form you want to create, and that form needs to have a workflow with it. There's an approval-based workflow. So think of the expense report yesterday. So the expense report form is kind of one of those forms where you actually want a trail, an audit trail of what happened. You want to capture the person who approved it, when they approved it, and so on. And that's a pretty normal process. Most forms follow that process. Now think for a second about something a little bit more complicated. So let's say that you had a form that you were filling out that was longer. So it was, instead of having 40 fields or 20 fields, the form had 100 fields. And there were multiple steps in the workflow. And you had to make sure that at each step in the workflow that it was approved or rejected, it was signed off on. So for those kinds of processes where you have an approval, where you need to assure that the document is whole at those different points in the process, we call those document-centric processes. So you want to be able to take a snapshot of the document at a certain time and say, yes, so-and-so signed off on it, and here's what they signed off on. You can go back to that version. You can see exactly what they signed off on, right? If you have that kind of process where you need auditing, then a document-centric process is what you need, because you need to be able to go back to different versions in the process and make sure, that so-and-so signed it, right, for auditing purposes. Now, a lot of processes aren't like that. Some of them don't require any auditing, but if you have a document-centric process, and that's a good example of one, then Power Apps is not a good solution for that kind of a scenario. And the reason for that is that Power Apps doesn't store the data in a document. So Infopath was great. It stores everything in one XML payload, and that can be signed. It can be you can have an electronic signature or a digital signature on it. You can do a lot of things on top of it. And FormsViewer takes that document-centric idea and it continues with it. So you can continue storing your documents in the same format XML. You can sign them, you can audit them, and you can capture them. And so that document-centric notion is a really important one to understand, that Power Apps doesn't really target, because when Power Apps saves the data, it saves it across a whole bunch of lists, and there is no single document, right, as a result of that. And that's also true for other products out there like Nintex and K2. They're database oriented, they're not document oriented. So that's one key difference between what we had, what we have today with Infopath and FormsViewer and what Microsoft's doing with Power Apps. So it's important to understand that. The other change, so just at a high level, you're going to have lots of tools in your toolbox. FormsViewer is just one of them. And there's situations where Power Apps is a great solution. For example, if you have a mobile app that you want to create and you want to make sure the performance is optimized for smartphones, FormsViewer uses the browser, which can be really good on smartphones, but it's not as good as having a rich client application on the smartphone. So for those situations, Power Apps would be a better alternative. If you have a smartphone scenario where you absolutely performance is critical, and that's the most important thing, then Power Apps would be a better solution than using a browser-based technology, because you can install a Power App, like you can install Teams, and that can run natively on the smartphone with better performance, right? So that's another reason. And I think there's others, but in general, you're going to have lots of different solutions, lots of different tools that you can use to create solutions. And one of those tools is FormsViewer, Infopath based. in terms of the format, in terms of the architecture. The other tool is going to be Power Apps, and you're going to have others, right? You're going to have other tools that you use. So hopefully that answers Kathy's question from yesterday. I'm sorry that she couldn't be here, but we are recording, so that's good. Are there any other questions for me at a high level regarding, FormsViewer? We're working on the designer. I think Kirby mentioned that yesterday. We are committed to providing solutions to you and patterns that you can use in your job to make your job go faster so you can be more effective. That's our goal here at Qdabra, is to help you out, make it easier for you to use to automate your business processes. We always add new labs, to our training. So this year, this is our first training in 2020, and let's go to day 2. Joanne, can you skip forward to what we're going to cover today? Yesterday we covered some pretty standard topics. How to publish a form, how to set up. I'm trying to remember now. How to create an expense report form in FormsViewer, and then how to add the dynamic data connections. And then Kirby showed how to get user profile service, and what was the other thing I'm missing? There was another demo yesterday, but those are pretty.
Sorry.
Say again, yeah.
Adding the validation XTP. Right,
validation. Yeah, so those are really common things that everyone's going to be doing with forms, and there are. If you look back to August of last year, we actually covered a couple other different items in the labs. So I encourage everyone to look back to those previous trainings. They're all online. You can download them. But with these new, every time we do training, we want to add something new to it. And in day 2 today, I don't know if there's a whole lot of new stuff in day 2, but when we get to tomorrow and Friday or Thursday, there will be new stuff. And we've done, I think we have 4 new labs, 4 new demos, three or 4 this training class. So, for example, the task pane that Joanne recently created. I know that actually, Joe, you're already using it, but that task pane is one key technology, which is really cool, and you can do it out of the box without any code. What are the other new techniques, Kirby? Or Joanne?
The other one is the dynamic images.
Dynamic images, right. So dynamic images is something, I know, Shane, you will look at that and think maybe you can use that. That's a great technique for certain kinds of deployment scenarios where you have one form that's serving multiple subsites. Whenever you have that kind of a central form that is being opened by numerous subsites, you may want to change the logos, the images that it shows when it opens. And then what else, Kirby? There's one more topic that we're adding, right, that's new.
Patrick, we updated the Auth XTP to simplify it.
That's right. We made that easier. So we made Auth easier. And Auth we're going to cover that tomorrow, right? Is that right?
Yes, it's for day 3.
Day 3.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll introduce that tomorrow before the class, but I don't want to hold everyone hostage any longer. I think what we'll do is, why don't we dive in? Let's go back to the questions real quick, Joanne, and then we'll dive into today's training. So if you can go back to the slide with the questions, that would be great. The quiz, I meant. Yeah. So let's just ask a few quiz questions here. So FormsViewer improves Infopath. How does FormsViewer improve Infopath? It improves Infopath by giving you all these features that you didn't have in Infopath. The Q rules commands is one area, but it also adds all these other new areas. For example, you're going to see today the mobile responsive design, making your forms responsive so that regardless of the size of the window, the form will look good. If you're on a smartphone, it'll look good. If you're on a tablet, and it'll look good if you're on a desktop. So we've spent lots of time over the years adding features that make your forms better than Infopath. But we're still using the Infopath framework in terms of the format for the files and the WYSIWYG editor and things like that. Now, So that's the first question. Let me ask someone to answer the second question here. How can we make the forms data connections dynamic? So this came up yesterday. Let's ask Emma, if you don't mind. What was the technique that she showed yesterday that does this? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's all right. I just had to unmute myself. So from what I remember, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give that lovely kind of lecture that was given on it. But basically what happens is you're saving the data connection as a URL into a field. And then based off of which data connection you're attempting to connect to, be it your test or your prod or perhaps a secondary production environment, you can change that data connection field dynamically. And that is the only field that you have to change. And then you're pointing to an entirely different database and thus an entirely different set of data.
Right. Yeah, it does assume that that site where you're opening it from has the same lists and libraries, same named, right, as the previous site. But assuming that the site assets the same name, then everything will just open as if it opened from the original site without changing the actual data connections. That's a great answer. Thanks, Emma. I know that you guys are going to be using that a lot there. That's why I want you to answer that.
Oh yes, we're very excited about it. So
great. So next question then, what command should we use to get the user profile? This is a pretty easy one here. I already mentioned the get user profile by name. And there's actually two variants of this. There's the site users variance, which is the default. And then there's the other way to do it. Joanne, what's the other way?
Let's see, using site profiles.
And what's the difference between those two different ways?
I think that when you're using profiles for the site parameters, it is querying the user profiles from the tenant SharePoint. And then if you're going to use the site users, it's going to query the user information based on the sites.
Yeah, and that's key. Is that thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. You're the trainer, but there's these two. We actually covered this in a webinar late last year. I think we also did it in the training last year. Maybe it was right after the training we did this. But in September of last year, we launched a new version of FormsViewer, and up until then we had been using the user profile service as the default. And I think we switched over, or we're in the process of switching over to make site users the default. The reason is that you need extra higher level of permissions to see the user profile information. And most people have it, but if you're installing the app for the first time, it doesn't grant you that. And so the site users was another way to do it. There are these two different things in SharePoint: the site users, which is a separate database than the user profile service, which can be synchronized to Active Directory. I mean, I think they can both be synchronized, but they're different techniques. They're different ways to get information from that. You can have, custom columns in the site users list. You can have custom properties. You can manage the different Active Directory properties that you're importing to the site users list. And with Active Directory, of course, you can have properties in Active Directory as well. So they're kind of two different ways of getting at the same set of data. It's not the same set of data, though. It's different, actually. And I should have a better answer in terms of when to use one over the other. We should definitely come back tomorrow and revisit this to give you a clear distinction. I think we did in the webinar. I need to go back to the webinar and take a look. Why is data validation important? Let's see. Logan, you guys have a lot of data validation in your big form. Do you want to answer number 4?
Yeah, having required fields makes it easier on our app leaders and whatnot to be able to know what to set up and things of that nature. Because before on our old form we didn't have that, so it was like, okay, what level of access? Having that required makes it 10 times better.
Yeah, going back after the fact and cleaning up the garbage that people input is no fun, right?
No.
Lack thereof. Thanks.
Reaching out via email and
Right. Yeah. Just force them to do the right thing at the very beginning. That's the way to go.
Exactly.
And then last question: were you able to work on any labs? Well, I guess we We don't need to ask everyone this. We need to get going. I'm going to step back and let Joanne and Kirby drive again. They did a great job yesterday, and I will be here again tomorrow morning to review and get your feedback. I'm also going to watch the recording later today after they've finished. And if any questions whatsoever, feel free to just email support@qdabra.com. And that goes to a lot of people here, not everyone, but it goes to most of everyone that you'd want to talk to. And it's been a pleasure to say hello to you this morning, and sorry to take up so much time. Joanne?
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, hello again, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for your feedback, and we apologize if we were a little bit faster yesterday. So today we'll slow things down for our demos. So for day 2, Kirby and I are really excited to demo the features today. We're going to demo submit to SharePoint and how to update the items in SharePoint, and we'll also add form styling. We'll use the submit to SharePoint list and refresh SharePoint list items commands in the SharePoint or in the expense report form. These 2 commands are the most frequently used commands in Q rules even before we built FormsViewer, and they normally go together. So we'll learn how to submit items to SharePoint lists and how to update the list items. And for Lab 2, you'll learn how to beautify your forms using CSS Styling and using the load resource command. There is a high demand now for making responsive forms, so especially when you make the forms mobile enabled, most users are going to be using that these days. So it's a good opportunity to learn how to do that. So we've implemented dozens of forms as well with mobile views for our clients, and they work beautifully. Thanks to CSS, we can now do responsive form designs, and we'll show you this technique in Lab 2. Then for Lab 3, we're going to show you how to replace the default widgets in the repeating tables in Infopath. We're going to show you how you can use picture buttons. It's a different approach for inserting and deleting rows, and I think that you're gonna love it. Also for Lab 4, we're going to provide another XTP for you for logging out inactive form users and auto-saving the changes. So those are what we're going to be presenting today. Okay, so for today's demos, I'm going to demo Lab 1 and 2. Lab 1 covers submit to SharePoint lists and the refresh SharePoint list items commands, and also the load resource command for Lab 2. Then we're gonna have a 10-minute break, same as yesterday, and then we'll pause. After that, we'll be back, and then Kirby will demo Lab 3 for the insert and delete commands, and Lab 4 for the auto log out, auto save XTP. Okay. Kirby, can you still hear me?
Yes, Joanne.
Okay. So I'm going to start with Lab 1 for submit and refreshing items to a SharePoint list. So we sent you a link to download the package for day 2. I hope everyone was able to download it. So for Lab 1, open the Lab 1 folder. And just open the PDF for the steps. Okay, so for Lab 1, our form will use QRules to submit to 2 SharePoint lists. Remember that in day 1, we created 2 lists, expense reports and expense list items. So we're going to submit data from our expense report to those lists using just one submit button and just one mapping file. So here I have opened the form. This is my end form. And just to explain why we're doing or why we're submitting to 2 different lists, the section above contains the header data. We're treating it as a header data because it's not repeating. So this header data contains the name, manager, report date, business purpose. So we're going to save that in our parent list, and we're calling it expense reports, this list. And for the section below it, expense items, this table is a repeating table, which means that we have a one-to-many relationship here. So just like in relational database, when you have a one-to-many relationship, you create separate tables for them, where one would be the parent table that, for example, it has a primary key ID, and the other one is a child table, which will have the repeating items. And in order to link them together or to each other, you'll normally add a reference of the ID of the parent in the child table, usually set as a foreign key, so that when you look into that child table, you'll know which child is related to which parent. So we're submitting the repeating items into, sorry, the Zoom mode wouldn't allow me to click above. Okay. So we're submitting our repeating items to this list, which is called expense list items. So let me just show you what we did to the starter form. So open it in design mode and expand this form group. You'll see that we've added a field here called SharePoint ID. It doesn't have to be this exact name. You can name it SharePoint ID or a complete with complete text, but we made it shorter. So it doesn't matter, just add it as a field in the form and then add an attribute under that. So in order to add an attribute in the field, you'll right click on it and click add, and so you'll be allowed to add an attribute there. So we've added an attribute called QRules last modified. So we need these fields because on a successful submit, QRules will populate them with the newly created items ID, so that we can update our list item from our form, and the form will also be able to sync with the latest data from the list to the form or vice versa. And then we've also added this SharePoint ID field under the expense details. So expand items to get to the repeating table. And we also have that SharePoint ID here. But you might be wondering how I was able to add multiple fields with the same name, because Infopath will not allow you to add fields with the same name. So for example, if I delete this and I right click on this repeating table, I add a field and I will name it just like that. It will not allow me because it says that that name already exists. So in order for you to duplicate this field under this repeating table, you'll need to right click on this field and then select reference and then expand or go to the repeating table that you want or any group that you want to duplicate the same field and click OK. Okay, so it's now here. It allowed us to duplicate it. So that's how you reference the same field in different parts of your data source. So that's important. We need to have those SharePoint ID because again, we're populating them with the item ID, and QRules will make use of that. So QRules will know when the form is last modified and it will compare that to the list. Okay, I'm going to close it. I will not save my changes. And to simplify the demo, I have a form here. Let's see. Okay, so I published a different version of the form. So I'll open one of my XML here. This version will display the item ID in the form just for demo purposes, so you can see the item ID. Yeah. So this is the parent list item ID, and I'm just displaying it for testing. So the form itself, the ID of the form itself is 25, and the ID of the expense items is 23. So if we go to the expense reports list, you'll see that I have an item here which has got that ID 25, and the total is correct, right? And then if I go to my expense list items, I also have here an item with the ID 23, but we have a report ID here to reference that this list item is a child of that parent item. So that's how we're linking the items in the SharePoint lists. So we only have one submit button, and this submit already has the submit functionality for submitting to those lists. And so if, for example, I will add an item. Okay, let's insert an item. Let's say meals. And I'll submit it. Okay. Okay, so now you're seeing that I have, or the expense list items list now has the item that I just submitted, and it has its unique ID, and it's taking the parent ID 25 as well. And so, for example, let's go back to the form. Let's edit it again. So for example, I edit this to say 20. Okay, so the amount now has changed to 20, and it didn't create a duplicate item, and it just updated the list. So that's how the submit to SharePoint lists and refresh SharePoint list items command works. So maybe your question is how about we change the items from the list? Will it be updated in the form? So let's try that. Let's change the amount for our lunch, and let's reopen the form. So you got the updated amount there. And if I delete this and submit, it will also be removed from the list. Yep, so that's how the curls commands work. So now I'm going to demo how I did that. So just open the Lab 1 doc. It's in the Lab 1 folder. So the first I'm going to do is I'm going to create the parent mapping in FormsViewer. So, okay. Let's see. I'm just going to upload the starter form again, and I'm going to the design page. Okay, then go to the SharePoint list mappings tab and enter a mapping name. We're going to use the default mapping name, which is always mapping. You can use a different mapping name, but in the submit to SharePoint list command, you need to specify the actual mapping name that you're going to use. So you need to use this parameter. And for example, my mapping, something like that. If you rename the mapping other than the default name mapping. So for now, I'm going to use mapping. And as you can see, it also detected the site where FormsViewer is. So I'm going to add top level mapping, like this button here. Then this SharePoint list mappings tab allows us to pick which list we want to submit our data to. So for the parent mapping, I'm going to select expense reports because that's our parent list. And then I'm going to select the root node of the expense report here, and I'm going to click confirm. And I'm going to check this because we're going to use the list name as the reference for the submit instead of the GUID of the list, because the list in SharePoint has its own GUID. But if we check that, we're going to we're telling the mapping to use the list name instead of the GUID. So that's the first part. Okay, add the mapping, and then if you reach this point, okay, so this is the part where you're going to select the form fields. Okay, so in this part of the mapping, I'm just adding fields here. And then we're going to select the SharePoint ID. As you remember, we discussed this. We need this in the mapping. And then select the SharePoint ID column. Okay, and then we're just gonna select the column names one by one. report name, report date, resource name, purpose. What else do we have in the expense report? A total, then status. Okay. And then you need to map these columns in the form fields in the form. So I'm guessing that you may not be familiar with the data source of the form, and you might not know where to map these fields to, but I'm gonna take it slow here. So, okay, report name. So report name is under, okay, sorry, report name, okay. And then report date is this field here. And then resource name is the employee name, so it's going to be under the resource group. So employee name. And purpose is under the report as well. Total. Oops, okay. Report total. Status. Status is under the form group. And confirm. Okay, and then save this. Okay, and then go to the Rule Editor tab and select Field Rules for rule type. Selected by default, so just leave it selected. Then select Field, and then switch to Qdabra Rules. Oh, sorry, not Qdabra Rules. Form Logic. So under Form Logic, select the Submit field here under Actions. So we're actually using the form logic data source to make our form rules centralized. So instead of having all of your rules in each of the buttons, we're going to have them in this centralized data source. So in your form buttons, you're just gonna have some rules there that triggers the submit. So that is a best practice that we're suggesting to our users, instead of adding the rules in the buttons, because some of your rules may change, and if one of the rules change, you need to update all of your buttons, and that's really hard work. So if you have rules in a centralized location, you just need to update the rules in that centralized location. Okay, so I'm going to select submit because that's where all the submit rules is taking action here. Yeah, so add a new rule and we'll call it submit to SharePoint list. Okay, and then just like in Infopath, we have action fields here, and the default is always set a field's value, so just leave it selected, and then select the command under the Qdabra rules data source. Select command, and we're telling the command to run this command, submit. Okay. So just that. So don't forget to surround it with quotes, and we don't have to add the mapping parameter, like a mapping name parameter, because like I said, we're using the default mapping name. But if you use a different mapping name, then you need to specify what mapping name you want to use for your submit to SharePoint lists. So we're all set. We're going to save this out. Okay, So I need to move this up right here because we need to run this action after the form sets the report name. Okay, and then we're going to save it. Okay, so let's go back to the upload template page and let's see. Let's download the form and let's see what it did to our form. Select design. Okay. So FormsViewer injected a mapping file. So you're going to go to the data connections and you'll see that there's a new data connection here for the mapping. And the mapping is just an XML file. So it added that resource file in your form. So hearing someone, okay, I'll just mute Kathy. Okay. Okay, so I'm showing you where that mapping file is. So go to resource files. Here you'll find the mapping.xml file, export that. And you don't need to do this, by the way. I'm just showing you what it looks like in Notepad. So I'll open it in Notepad. Okay, so this is just a plain XML file showing the list collection, the expense reports list, and this is the GUID of that list. We have the mapping of form fields here and telling us which SharePoint column it's mapped to. So that's basically it. And we have the SharePoint list URL here. And you don't need to edit this manually. You just need to go to FormsViewer and FormsViewer will automatically generate the mapping file for you. Okay, so, and we added that, remember that we added that submit action. So this is that one, submit to SharePoint list, and we're using the command submit to SharePoint list. Okay, so go back to the form. Let's open it. Okay, so let's try to submit one. And remember that we just created the mapping for the parent list, and we haven't added the child list yet in the mapping. So okay. So I'll submit. And let's see. Okay, so this is the one that I just submitted. Yeah, so it's submitted to our header or to our parent data SharePoint list. And for the expense list items, of course, it's not there yet because we need to add another child mapping. So it's just to show that it's working, and I want to work piece by piece. So if you want to work in the this document, you'll see that after each mapping is created, there is a test section. So you'll be able to see whether you're able to correctly implemented the steps. So so we tested if the parent mapping worked. So now we will add a new mapping for the child. Okay. So let's select the mapping. And then I'm going to add a new child mapping here. I will click the plus button. And then I'm going to select the expense list items, which is this child mapping. Then I'm going to check data is from the repeating group. Then I'm going to select that repeating group from our data source, which is this item repeating group. And if you're not, or if you're unsure which is the repeating group, you can expand here in the Infopath designer. And if you see that the folder has this blue down arrow icon, it is the repeating group. Okay, so I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to check this, use list name for submit, and then I'm going to add my rows for the mapping. And then I'm going to select the SharePoint ID again, but I'm going to select the one that we added under the item repeating group. Okay, confirm. Then I'm going to map this to the SharePoint ID column. And then for the next row, I'm going to select the report ID column. And this is where we're going to shred the parent list ID. Okay, so it's like acting as a foreign key. And then I'm going to add the other fields. So say category, description, date, then amount, then status. And I'm going to select the fields that corresponds to that category, description, expense date. So just make sure that you're selecting from the repeating group amount. Okay, and then for this part, this is tricky because the status field is under a different folder or a different group in our data source, which is under the form group. And if I select that, FormsViewer will not allow me, and it will say that the path we are trying to add is not a child of the current parent table. Please manually add the field XPath. So it's just telling us that the field that we just selected is not under the item repeating group. So we need to add it manually by hand, or add the XPath manually in this mapping. So we've added a note of that in this document as well. So we've already done that. Okay. Okay, parent list ID. Okay, this is the part we're doing now. So we're adding the status column, the XPath of that manually. So in order to know the relative XPath, so for example, I am here, and the field that I want to get is in here. So we use in XPath, we use // when we want to go back up. So if I want to go back up here, I will put a // and another // because I'm going up another group here. And then I want to jump here, so I'm going to add another // so 3 // So if you're unsure, the trick is add a formatting rule. We don't need to save this. We just need to get the relative XPath of that field. So I just selected the repeating table there. Then select status here. So this is the field that we want to get the XPath. And then select this drop down again and select the expression. And it will generate the XPath for you. So thanks, Infopath. Yeah, so I'll copy that and don't want to save that. And I'll put it here like that. Okay, and I will save my mapping. So now we both have the parent mapping and the child mapping. So if I open the form, submit, and I'll refresh the parent list and the child lists. So this is the one, 49. And so this is the list items referenced by the parent ID 49, and they also have their own unique IDs here. Yeah, so to add the refresh, so we need to add another command for that. So remember that I demoed how the list items are updated when you make the changes to the form, and when you delete something to the form, that list is also updated. So you need another command for that, and we're going to add that here also in FormsViewer. Go to the rule editor, select or leave this selected, field rules, and go to Qdabra rules finished loading node. And here I'm going to add a new rule that I'm going to call refresh. So select, set the field's value, select the Qdabra rules command node as the target field, and then here I'm going to add okay. So if you're not familiar with the commands, you can go to this command builder tab and just look for that command. And then select mode update and copy to clipboard. Go back to the rule editor and paste it there. Okay, so this means that every time the form opens, this command will check whether there are any changes to the list. If there are any changes, it will query those changes and display the most recent data in your form. And if there are any recent changes to the form, it will also upload the latest in the list. So that's how it works. The submit to SharePoint list command and the refresh SharePoint list items command go hand in hand together. So that's the end of lab 1 for day 2. So do you have any questions? Does anyone have any questions for me about this technique? I'm sure you're going to be able to use them in your forms. Some of your forms may already be submitting to SharePoint list, and with this mapping here, it's now very easy to add multiple mappings. You know, you can submit to multiple lists in just one submit. Yeah, so that's lab 1.
I have a question. I joined a little bit late, but I use DBXL for mappings to SQL or Infopath since FormsViewer is installed now. Do I continue to still use DBXL for that, or can I use this for Infopath on the forms that we have with a mapping part?
Thanks for that question, Kathy, but I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Can you please repeat your question?
Would we use DBXL? I'm currently using DBXL, and we just got FormsViewer. Would I continue to use DBXL, or should I go ahead and use this to do my mappings with my existing Infopath? Could you just use either one?
Yeah. Well, if you're using DBXL to submit to your database, then you'll just need to add another action here to submit to DBXL, and this command works with DBXL also. I mean, you can use this at the same time when you're submitting to DBXL. You can submit to SharePoint lists at the same time we're submitting to SharePoint or a form library, and then here you're going to have a submit action for your DBXL. So it's just work in one fell swoop. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Kathy. All right, so I'm going to close this form for lab 1, and I'm going to proceed with lab 2. Just closing this out. So lab 2 is about making beautiful mobile responsive forms. And okay, just opening the PDF file. So it is important that you start using the starter form for this lab, because we made some changes to the XSL in the starter form in order for the CSS styling to work. So right click, let's wait. Okay, so I just need to open to upload it directly. Okay. So select the starter form and upload it to FormsViewer. I already have it here, so I'm just going to update this. Then select design. So now we're going to go to this Manage Resources tab. Then click New Resource, choose File. And then in the Lab 2 folder, we included this styles CSS file. So select that and save. Okay, then go to the rule editor and select field rules. Change the data source to Qdabra rules. Go to finished loading, click confirm. Add a new rule here called load CSS and set a field's value. Select the target field command under Qdabra rules. And here we're going to use the load resource command to load the styles.css file. So the load resource command, you can also search for that here. So the required parameter is the name of the CSS file. So the name of the CSS file is styles.css. Okay. And copy that to clipboard, go back to rule editor, and enter or surround it with quotes. Okay, then save changes. Oops, and then I forgot one last step is to move this up because we want to load the resource file first before any other action there. So let's put it second from the top. Save changes. Okay, so I'm going to open the previous form just so we can see the difference between the two forms. The previous form without the CSS style. Okay. Oh, okay. And now with the CSS style. Okay, so this is now the new form with the styles.css resource file. And if you compare that to the previous form, you'll see that there's a big change there. We're now using a beautiful, nice background here. And then we also added styling for the button. So if I hover on the button, you'll see that it is it added some highlight to the button. And this previous form doesn't have that design there. It's just the buttons are just looking flat, and the styling is just added using the border shading and borders in Infopath. And as you can see, the cursor is the standard arrowhead cursor. But here, if I hover on it, it will show the hand cursor. And also, as you'll notice that the controls are different also. So the controls here, like for the text boxes, the corners are sharp. I don't know if you can see it, but it doesn't have that smooth radius unlike here. And I've added some padding. Also, the drop down is displaying beautifully, as well as the date picker here, because we've made some changes to put the calendar image in the center. And also the table or the content box that is holding all of the view is different because it now has a rounded side like that, and this one is sharper. So I just want to make it nicer. And also, so let's see. I think that's just about it. So we tested that. And so let's look at the CSS file here before I show you that one other technique. So just to explain it briefly, this is adding the background. We put a teal background here, so that is this color. And we have, we're setting the width property here for the table and column tags in the XSL. So we're making it 100% because we want the form to be responsive. So if I minimize this, it will adjust to my to the width of my, or to my screen size. Unlike here, it's not responsive, as you can see. So that is what's making the form responsive. Also, the Infopath controls are taking the 100% width. And then for the text boxes, this is the CSS styling that's editing the text boxes and the drop down. Also, this is the CSS for the buttons. So if you know CSS, you can play around, you can add more styling if you want. So yeah, I think if you're really, if you're a developer and you're advanced, you know CSS, then you'll love how to design your forms with this load resource command. So I have another one to show you. Kirby, do we still have time, or?
Yeah, I guess we can show them. Is it the mobile?
Yeah, I want to show them the mobile view of the expense report and how they can mobilize their forms. So just to show you quickly how you can create a mobile view. I'm sharing my phone screen here. I hope you can see. I'm using a power mirror to show my phone. And I'm just opening a link of the expense report in my mobile. And I'm sorry because it's displaying a watermark here. I just installed this power mirror in my machine. Okay, so this is the expense report in mobile view. So it's displaying beautifully in my phone. I have a fixed header here. And if I scroll down, it will scroll my other content of the form. And I can also submit from here. I have a fixed footer here, so it doesn't, the footer doesn't move. So the CSS styling is also applied here, but we have created a different view so that the controls fit in the mobile view. Okay, so that's the end of lab 2. So to recap the labs that I just demoed, I demoed lab 1 for submitting and refreshing items to a SharePoint list. We showed you how the form can submit form data to 2 different lists, parent and child. And we also showed you how we can update the list items when the form data changes using the refresh SharePoint list items command. So you can create the mapping with less effort by just using the FormsViewer designer page. That's lab 1. And lab 2 is about the CSS styling. We showed you how to make your forms beautiful and mobile responsive. We just provided the custom CSS file that you can reuse in your forms if you want, then it's very easy to do. Just import the CSS as resource file, and we've done that also in the Forms Designer in FormsViewer. And then we added the load resource command to load the CSS resource file. So yeah, that's the end of Lab 1 and Lab 2. Does anyone have any comments for Lab 2? Let's see.
Yeah, I do, if I can speak.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Joe.
Hi, Kirby. Hey, this is really great. My question is, how did you come up with the CSS file, the styles.css file?
Okay, how did I come up with this file?
Yes.
I think we just started with just parts of it, like adding this HTML body, and then it just grew. Then we discovered that we can design the controls, and then we added that here. Actually, there's no tool to generate these CSS files, so
Okay.
yeah, we're providing this to you so you can use this to your forms. And if you want custom styling, then well, you'll have to research what CSS applies to your forms, and you can add it here. And there's a trick that I found in Chrome. So if I click Control I in Chrome, let's see. And this is the developer tools in Chrome. And if I just, okay. And if I don't know if you're seeing the developer tools, but I just selected this arrow here and I pointed something in the view. So this allows me to like investigate what styling the form has, and it is displaying the CSS here actually. Let's see. So if I click, let's see if I click on this button. No, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, so I can uncheck here and I can see what CSS was applied to that. And I can also change the colors here if I want, just to test what colors I want for that button. And I can test which padding applies to my forms, things like that. I can increase radius. Yeah, so this is just for testing. It's just showing, or you can play around on it and then apply it in the CSS file. Yeah.
Okay,
so
awesome.
One thing you can do. Thanks, Joe, for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the end of Lab 1 and 2. And our next lab demo, Kirby will demo it. And now we'll go for a quick break and we'll be back in 10 minutes. So yeah, so we'll be here. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we're back again. So hope everyone had a good break. So Kirby, are you ready to demo lab 3 and 4?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll make you presenter.
Okay.
Make host. Okay. And I'll stop sharing. I can see your screen now.
Hello?
Yep. I can see
Okay.
your screen. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So the first lab that I'm going to show you is all about the insert and delete commands in FormsViewer. So Infopath has a default way of allowing users to insert and delete rows in a repeating table, and that is by clicking the insert item link here, or by clicking the arrow button beside the row to insert an item either before or after the current row, and also remove or delete the selected row. We can do the same functionality in FormsViewer and replace this existing approach using picture buttons and by leveraging the Kuros commands insert and delete. So here's the end form. Oops. All right, so here's the end form for this lab, and I'm going to show you how this insert and delete buttons look like. So here you can see that we have replaced Infopath's default insert item link with these insert and delete buttons, which are basically just icons used as picture buttons. So with this technique, not only does it provide a fancier way of inserting or deleting rows in a repeating table, but it also saves time as it reduces the amount of clicks the user has to do in the form. So let's go ahead and do the steps in the lab. So here I have the folder for the lab package, and let's open the starter form. And here in our form canvas, beside this category drop down, let's add a picture button here from the control section, and right click that picture button, select properties, and here we have the insert and delete buttons. So first, let's select the insert and click apply. And as you can see, it's a bit too large for the row. So let's resize that and click apply, and do the same thing for the delete button. So what we can do is just copy that and paste it here, and right click again, go to properties and change the icon to be the delete, to point to the delete button. And let's resize that again. And let's make this a bit wider. So next is we're gonna add a new rule for this add button here. So let's add an insert row action that will set the Qdabra rules command node. and with the insert Qrules command. So what we can do is just go to the lab document here and just copy the value that we just added for the insert. So copy that and paste it in the value field by clicking the function button. And as you can see, we have here the insert command with a parameter parent, and the parent is pointing to the items group in the main data source. And for the child parameter, we have the item repeating group. So for the position, we're going to add the value of the count field in the main data source. So just select this one and click the insert field or group button here. Select the count field in the main data source and click OK. And we're just basically telling Qrules to insert a row after the current row. So click OK. So I also want to show you that there's a default value for our count. So if you click the count field here, click function, you're going to see that it's using the preceding sibling function in Infopath. So this is just returning the row number of the repeating table. So that's what we're using for the position parameter in the insert. So next is we're going to add a rule for the delete button. So let's name it as delete row. We're going to set again the command node to have the delete command. Oops. So going back to the lab document, we have here the value for the delete. So just copy that and paste it here. Replace the count field again. The count text here with the actual count field from the main data source. So verify formula and click OK. And then we're also going to add a formatting rule for the delete button because we want to make sure that the delete button does not show up in the first row to prevent the users from deleting all the rows in repeating table until nothing's left. So let's do that. So click formatting, hide if first row. So let's add a condition where count is equal to 1. Then it will hide that button for us. So after that, after adding the rules, the insert and delete Qrules commands in our picture buttons, let's now go to the properties of the repeating table, and we need to disable the Infopath's default widget. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
All right.
It's louder now. Yeah.
All right. So I just disabled the default insert and delete functionality of Infopath here. So just click apply and OK. So that's just how you apply this insert and delete feature in FormsViewer. So yeah, this is how it looks like. Again, if you want to delete these current row, then just click the close button. And as you can see, we've hidden the delete button in the first row here. So that's for the lab 3. Does any one of you have any questions before we proceed with the next lab? All right, so I guess we can now proceed with the auto logout Xtp. So let me just remove these tabs. So for those of you who have watched movies or TV series in Netflix, I guess you're familiar with the screen prompt that appears when it detects that you've been inactive after a period of time that says, are you still watching? Well, we've built a similar feature that you can apply in your forms. So let me show you how it looks like. Here we have the end form for lab 4. Let's open the form and let's add some data to the fields. So here we're adding some random data because the form will check every 15 seconds if there are any form changes to trigger the auto logout feature. So in a few seconds now, there's a prompt that will show up. So let's wait for a few seconds. And the form is going to check if we're idle or inactive. All right, so as you can see, it says your session will expire in 60 seconds. Any form changes will be saved automatically. Please click on the button if you're still there. So if the user clicks the button, it will cancel the auto logout and auto save feature. So after that, the form will check again after a few seconds to see if there are still changes in the form, and if it detects that there is, then it will show again the prompt. But if the user is unable to click the button, the form will proceed to log out the user and save the changes, which means it will automatically be saved to the form library. That way, the user can open the same form later on to continue adding data to the form.
Is this an activity based on input into a field, or is it based on no mouse movement?
Yeah, it's based on the no mouse movement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So as you can see, yeah. So here we have another message that says your session has expired and the changes have been saved. And if we check our expense report library, we can see that, wait, let's refresh that. And here we have our item here. It's saved in the expense report library. So the reason we have developed this because there are chances that some users leave the form open with unsaved changes, and there are forms that can only be accessed by one user at a time. So we want to make sure that we don't let an inactive user lock the form so others will be able to access it. And with this feature, we also prevent unauthorized access. For instance, when a user walks away without locking the device from which the form is opened. And lastly, if there are unsaved changes in the form, the XTP includes the auto-saving to prevent data loss. So now I'm going to show you how to add this cool feature in the expense report form. So again, we are providing you the XTP for that feature so that all the rules are already there. Let's open the starter form for this lab. Click design and let's add the XCP. So I've already done that. So here you can see that it's already added in the control section. So what we need to do now is just point our cursor here at the bottom part of our form canvas and just click the XTP from the control section. And next is in the finished loading, finished loading node of the Qdabra rules. This is where we are setting the onload rules, right? So we're gonna add a new action that will run the auto logout feature. So let's set the value of the action run on load node under the Xtp logic auto logout data source to the value go. So it will trigger all of the rules under that that node. So next is we're going to change the temp fields to point to the actual nodes in Qdabra rules. So we actually have here the temporary fields. And in the temp command, we have here the rule called set Qros fields. And we need to replace this stop field to have the command node from Qdabra rules, and also this part we have to set the result node here as well. And then in the save node, still under the Xtp logic auto logout, we need to disable this set form name and submit to library, because the expense report form already has its own submit logic. So let's disable that and just add a new rule for triggering the submit of our expense report. So that is located in the form logic under actions, submit node, and then just add the value go to trigger all the rules under that node. So that's it for changing the, for configuring the Xtp to run in your form, or in this case, in the expense report form. And if you want to change the allowable period for inactivity, you can change it under the logout check node here. As you can see, we have this attribute field called tick. So look for the rule called check for, I know there's a lot of rules in here, but look for the check for should show prompt. So in here, we're indicating the seconds for the inactivity. So here it says 300, so it's for 300 seconds, which is equivalent to 5 minutes. So you can customize that. And also, if you want to change the timeout setting, you can change the value in the showing prompt, check for should log out rule. So here the default is 60 seconds. So, which means that the prompt will be displayed for 60 seconds. And if the user is unable to click the button, then it will auto log out the user and auto save the changes in the form. So that's about it for updating the Xtp. As you can see, it's just a few steps. It will just require a few steps to configure the Xtp. So yeah, that's it for Lab 4. If you have any questions, feel free to ask it right now. All right, so I guess that's it for our demo for Lab 3 and 4. Joanne?
Okay, do you want me to show the summary slides for Lab 3 and 4?
All right, yep.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Okay. All right. There you go.
All right, so just to summarize what we did, first for Lab 3, I've showed you the insert and delete Qros commands in FormsViewer, and it provides you, it makes your forms user-friendly, offers lesser clicks, and we've also added some picture buttons, and it's more discoverable than the those default widgets in Infopath. And the steps for those is just to add the picture, the icons as picture buttons. And we've also added the insert command, the delete command, and added a formatting rule for the delete to hide it in the first row, and disable, and lastly disable the Infopath default widgets. So
I have a quick question on that. If you could, and I'm pretty sure how to do this, if under certain circumstances, let's say a state of a form is completed or finished or is under review or something like that, and you don't want things to be added, you would be able to add in a couple of more images, let's say a gray plus sign and a gray minus sign, and have them display under those circumstances with no rules, so that they would just be inactive. You wouldn't want to have active plus and minus buttons for every row for forever. So is that how you would go ahead and just disable that?
I'm not sure if I
when you're filling out the form and there's a repeating table, you want to add and delete rows, and you submit that. When it's submitted, you don't want the next user, whether it's an approver or just the next person opening the form, to be able to add and delete rows. So would you just remove the buttons, or just add other buttons that are grayed out so that gives them an indication?
Yeah, so for that, you can actually try to hide those buttons based on the status of the form. So let's say, for example, if the initial status of the form is new, then once it's submitted, it becomes the status becomes submitted, right? So you can actually use that value of the status to hide those insert and delete buttons. So the user that will open that existing form won't be able to add or remove rows to that repeating table.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thanks for your question. And for lab 4, for lab 4, I've showed you the how to apply the auto logout Xtp to your form, or in the expense report form. So it's for detecting inactive users, and it will prompt the user if they're still there. And you can actually use you can switch the view to a new form view in your form, or in this case, we've used just an overlay to show the users that the form is already saved in the library. And yeah, we've also showed you that it was successfully saved in our library. And for these steps, we've inserted the XTP, or reported the XTP to the form, and we've configured the QRules logic. And also, I've showed you where to change the timings for that auto logout and auto save feature. So yeah, that's it for lab 4. Joanne?
Thanks, Kirby, for the wonderful demo. So just a quick summary of what we did for day 2. We've learned how to submit and refresh items to a SharePoint list using 2 commands in QRules. We used the submit to SharePoint list and refresh SharePoint list items commands, and we submitted and mapped repeating data to both lists using FormsViewer, so no Infopath designer required there. And we also showed you how to make your forms beautiful by adding CSS styles to your forms and how to make them mobile responsive by adding those properties in the styles.css file. And also, Kirby demoed how to replace the default insert and delete widgets in the Infopath's repeating table. She showed you how to use picture buttons to insert and delete repeating rows. Then she also showed you how to add the auto logout Xtp in your forms to automatically log out inactive users. So okay, so just like what we did for day one of our class, we wanted to know and ask you for your comments. What were your takeaways, the things that you've learned in the class? We'd appreciate if you're able to share that with us. So let's just go over the table again from top to bottom in the participants list, if you don't mind. Let's see. So I'm seeing BS5731. I think this is Alicia.
Yep, that's me.
First, hello, Alicia.
Hi. Actually, I was really looking forward to seeing how to connect to different SharePoint lists. I think this is something we could utilize a lot better. I think in our forms currently, we just have a lot of duplicating information in multiple places, and I could see this being something that we could utilize right away.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. So next is Caroline. You see anything that inspired you?
I was actually a little late joining today because I was on a support call with one of your colleagues, but most of today was a good refresher for me. The one new feature was the last one, the auto log out idle form users, which was very interesting. I'm not sure how I would utilize that, but good to know that it's available.
Thank you. And I just wanted to know, were you able to fix the FormsViewer on-prem issue?
We did not, but we're gonna spin up FormsViewer online on Friday with you, and hopefully that will work for us instead.
Okay. Thanks. So thanks for that comment, Caroline. Next is Kathy. Kathy, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. I like the connection. We've used VBXL before. It looks like this is a little bit easier interface to get around in, and I like the fact that you can download all the roles and have them available in the new designer and the mobile. Work is very important to RCE and CIO, so I look forward to using that as well. Hopefully I can start working in a FormsViewer today. I think that they have it set up with all telemedicine, and I'm going to try to start.
Okay, thanks. Wonderful. I hope you'll be able to apply one of these techniques in your telemedicine forms soon. Okay. Next is Donald. Hello, Donald. Do you have any comments? Hello.
I like the plus and minus. I think that's anything that you can make it more attractive. I'm not sure whether about the cascading style sheet. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I don't think that we would particularly use a timeout. I don't know if that really applies to our situation, but it's always nice to know that you would be able to give them a message of some sort, even if it's just to tell them something and not necessarily, you know, make them log off or force them out. So the messages I think are pretty cool.
I see. Thanks. I'm pretty sure that you're going to be able to reuse the plus and minus in your repeating tables. In our internal forms, we use it in a lot of our forms. Like for our timesheets, we have repeating tables in our timesheets because we entered multiple rows for our time. So we use that plus and minus technique for our timesheets. Okay, thank you, Donald, for that comment. Next is Emma.
Hi, everyone. I have to say the thing that really caught my attention was responsive forms on mobile. I mean, I can't even express how many internal users we have using tablets and BlackBerry even before we made the move to work from home. So I'm incredibly excited about finally being able to give them a SharePoint Forms experience that looks the same as when they're at their desk. So I'm very excited about that. And we do actually use auto logout quite a fair bit for our applications. We have a lot of sensitive information we work with at the credit union, so our forms usually contain information that we wouldn't want somebody to come across if a user left their computer open. So we would probably really make use of auto logout on almost all of our forms, and it would be a very short window. So.
Thank you. Well, the CSS styles and the mobile responsive forms are new techniques that we just added in the class. The mobile one, we never we were not able to show that in the previous class, so it's a relatively new topic that we just showed you in day 2, and I'm really glad to know that these techniques fit for your form requirements in your company. It's like a match made. So I'm really happy that you're excited to reuse these features. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thank you.
So next is Joe. Do you have any feedback, Joe?
Yeah, actually a couple. We're actually working on some forms that deal with expenses, and we have 2 expense applications that was inspired to see that the SharePoint list, submit the list and update and refreshing the forms, that I think I could leverage that to make sure that the different forms are populating the same list, and that everybody's working off the same page. So that was great. And I was also happy to see Joanne's explanation of the CSS, especially the developer Control-I command in Chrome, to be able to get a better idea of what kind of styles are applied to different objects. I could see being able to use that for research for our own styling needs, and being able to see things on different websites, and liking the style and being able to see how it was done. I think that's a great thing to have in the arsenal.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for your comments. Yeah, I think that the solution that we provided, expense report demo form, is it really fits in one of your form solution, the call activity report. As I remember, it deals with expenses. So yeah, I think that you can reuse one of the features like the submit to SharePoint list in your forms. And yeah, I'm glad that you like the CSS technique too. Thanks. Yeah, so I think, did I miss anyone? Yeah, so I think that we lose some people. Shane is not here anymore, and Sam. So I hope that everyone was able to download the package for day 2 that we sent out earlier. Some people emailed us telling us that they're having some issues with Hightail. So please just send us an email. Feel free to let us know if you're having some trouble accessing the files. And also we're also going to make this video recording available to you soon. Also, we're going to upload them in our YouTube channel so you can rewatch them later if you want. Yeah, so thank you. Thanks again for joining day 2. And I hope that we're going to see you again tomorrow. For day 3, we have very cool features to to demo. Tomorrow we have the Authy XTP and other cool stuff that Patrick mentioned earlier today. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for your patience, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.